What makes this lecture exceptional is that it covers the first officially announced and set trend in the history of Polish cinema.
Ogłoszonego, ustalonego nurtu w historii polskiego kina i to takiego, który zajął stałe miejsce w kinie światowym.
One that found a solid footing in world cinema, with all due respect to later accomplishments in Polish cinema. This was the only case when a certain trend, a large group of films by different directors made at a similar time, found a special place in the minds of audiences around the world. This happened for a number of reasons, and was the result of a unique historical situation. Liberation from the girdle of Stalinism in a culture that derived its name from the climax of the period, which was October 1956. But it was also the result of the coming of fresh talent. The first generation of graduates of the film school in Łódź, created in 1948.
Właśnie absolwenci tej uczelni okazali się pierwszego, drugiego, trzeciego rocznika na czele z...
It was the graduates of the first three classes, Andrzej Munk and Andrzej Wajda among them, as well as the graduates of the earlier year-long film course in Krakow in 1945 to 46,
w Krakowie 45 do 46 to Wojciech Has, Jerzy Kawalerowicz,
such as Wojciech Has and Jerzy Kawalerowicz. This was a group of very talented people who brought a new level of quality into Polish cinema. Film history books around the world often mention this Polish school. It is often described at the beginning of a chapter on the new wave, which is not entirely accurate because these films do not change the way of storytelling. This is still the traditional form of narrative. But the way they use the language of cinema and their innovative use of images indeed brought new artistic quality, a result of the historical circumstances. It was a form of honest conversation with society in a situation of limited freedom. It was necessary to bypass the censors and thus use language that made this possible. This is sometimes referred to as Aesopian language. The first film where this new term was coined, The Polish School, was Andrzej Wajda's feature debut, Pokolenie, A Generation. Ironically, this film had been commissioned by the authorities to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the new leadership, set to premiere in 1954. The film was based on a social realist in terms of ideology and rather uninteresting and anachronistic novel by Bohdan Czeszko. But the way Andrzej Wajda brought it to the screen turned the film into the first voice of a generation. As the title suggests, of the so-called generation of Columbuses, those born in the 1920s, about their wartime experience. The second film, or the first to truly take on Stalinism, which was also interesting and vital for everyone involved in culture, was Andrzej Munk's 1956 feature Człowiek na torze, Man on the Tracks. This was the first work of the director-screenwriter duo of Munk, who made his feature debut with this film, and Jerzy Stefan Stawiński, an excellent screenwriter who had never gone to film school, but his life experience proved to be most fascinating for these Polish school projects, as they often addressed the experience of the past 2 decades or contemporary history.
Człowiek na torze to był z kolei
Człowiek na torze, Man on the Tracks, was particularly interesting in the way the filmmakers decided to tackle Stalinism on its own territory and using its own methods.
rozprawić się ze stalinizmem na jego terenie i jego metodami, podejmując
By addressing a subject quite common in socialist realism.
realizmu socjalistycznego. I akcja się wtedy właśnie dzieje
The story is set in Stalinist Poland in the early 1950s.
w lat 50. Tytułowym bohaterem grany
The eponymous man, played by Kazimierz Polanski, is an old-school engine driver, representing the old approach to the trade, who refuses to acknowledge the new working methods and the imposed social norms of Stalinist Poland.
narzuconej obyczajowości stalinowskiej Polski.
He's not the enemy.
Wrogiem
Brudno! Rozpuścił was mechanik.
nie jest też
He's not particularly likable either.
jest takim fachowcem w
He's an old-school skilled workman, harsh, often cruel towards his co-workers,
współpracowników, ale równocześnie uczciwym.
but at the same time honest and respectable.
Ten film pokazywał, że
What this film showed was that he was treated as an outcast, as an enemy, due to the type of relations imposed by the new political system.
relacji narzucaną przez nowy system polityczny. Tam właściwie on jest ofiarą, to znaczy on
He is the victim, in two meanings of the
w
word.
wypadku
He dies in an accident to protect people from a disaster.
ratowania ludzi przed katastrofą, ale równocześnie jest w pierwszej
But at the same time, he is at first accused of sabotage,
ponieważ ma taką
having been labelled as an enemy of society.
Teraz dla mnie cała sprawa jest jasna. Orzechowski chciał się zemścić na zawiadowcy i na kolei. Zgasił lampę, żeby zabić zaporę i zniszczyć parowóz.
Pracuję na kolei o 20 lat dłużej niż wy, Warda. On nie mógł tego zrobić. Złamałby prawo, którego nikt nie śmie łamać.
Ten film pokazywał, że nie ma
This film showed that not only were there no criminals in this circle, in the group we're observing,
które oglądaliśmy, ale nie ma też nawet ludzi.
but there were no truly disagreeable people either.
System tworzący
It was the system that created false relationships between people, poisoned them.
ich. Tam drugim bohaterem filmu jest
Another protagonist is a young man whose job is to inform on the engine driver.
na tego właśnie maszynistę, tytułowego bohatera. Z takich właśnie jeden krok fałszywy.
One false move results in another one, and so on.
Do,
All that leads to tragedy, to deceit. This film clearly showed the dishonest nature of the system.
Fałsz systemu. Wszedł na ekrany na
It was released in early 1957, in that short period of almost unlimited freedom,
pełnej swobody. To był taki okres, trwał niewiele ponad
a
rok.
period that lasted a little over a year, when freedom in cinema was so great that a studio head would be able to sign off on a film without a signature from the authorities, the minister representing the government, who was responsible for the whole film industry.
Reprezentującego władzę, odpowiadającego za całość kinematografii, kierować film do produkcji. No ale ten okres prawdziwej
But this
wolności
period of complete freedom did not last long.
i właściwie człowiek na torze nie miał
Człowiek na torze, Man on the Tracks, remained the sole example. Except for the last segment of Monk's Zezowate Szczęście, Bad Luck, there were no other examples of films that took on Stalinism.
Czy przyznajecie się do wszystkiego?
Do czego? No, ja mówiłem już przecież, że to mnie wąsik.
A dajcie mi spokój z tym wąsikiem! Nie róbcie ze mnie wariata. Należycie do tajnej organizacji, która działa na rzecz obcego wywiadu, tak?
Tak. Nie! O Jezu, Jezus Maria, o Boże.
No jak się przyznacie do wszystkiego, to będą okoliczności łagodzące, no. Wciągnęli was przez głupotę, prawda?
Nie! Nie należę do żadnej organizacji! Nawet z nikim nie mówiłem o żadnej organizacji!
Tak? A kto wam kazał śledzić obywatela Kropaczyńskiego? No?
To stało się tabu.
It became a taboo subject, And it wasn't until Człowiek z marmuru, Man of Marble, 20 years later, that the issue was addressed again.
strzenia i tak dalej. To wymuszało
Control was tightened, etc. This created a need for the new forms of artistic expression to circumvent censorship.
zakazów cenzuralnych. I ta właściwa polska szkoła filmowa, kanoniczna,
This gave rise to the Polish school, beginning with Andrzej Wajda's Canal,
w tym roku premiera
made in 1956, premiering in 1957 at the Cannes Festival.
takie rozumienie, dostrzeganie tego
The spectacular international success of Canal marked the start of this understanding of the new trend in Polish cinema that did not tackle vital issues directly and circumvented censorship.
czy zakazów. Kanał był przykładem
Canal
pierwszej opowieści
was the first film to tell the story of the Warsaw Uprising and the Home Army,
o tym wszystkim,
putting an end to the hostile conspiracy of silence that surrounded the Polish wartime underground movement.
jakie towarzyszyło polskiemu państwu podziemnemu i temu dawnemu wyobrażeniu o historii polskim powołaniu.
And the old understanding of post-war politics in the country, which lasted for at least a decade after the end of the war. This was truly a novelty, and the need to overcome this conspiracy of silence and finding ways to tell this story in an honest fashion created an artistic fever that Western audiences found both original and appealing.
I oryginalna dla widowni zachodniej. Raz umieszczenie
Setting the middle and most dramatic act of the film inside the sewers, underground, in a no-win situation that made the tragedy tangible,
bez wyjścia, udosłowniającej
the tragic choice of whether they go left or right or straight ahead,
pójdą w prawo, czy pójdą prosto, cokolwiek zrobią, skończy się śmiercią.
any choice they make will lead to their death, that was
To
incredible.
było niesamowite. Kino zachodnie potrzebowało
In Western cinema, situations like this had to be fabricated, like in The Wages of Fear, a thriller by Henri-Georges Clouzot that won the Golden Palm in Cannes in 1953.
tutaj nie trzeba było
Here there was no need for genre gimmicks to find a situation, a real-life tragic situation.
to w Polsce rozczarowywało.
This was often a cause for disappointment in Poland because audiences expected a heroic tale of the Warsaw Uprising, of the kind later told in Miasto 44, Warsaw 44. But Miasto 44, Warsaw 44 is false. I say this without having seen the film,
Ale
but knowing what it's about.
wiedząc, czym ono jest. Atrakcyjny fałsz.
It's an appealing false account made 70 years after the war, whereas Canal was false in an entirely different way. But it had an artistic truth that stemmed from a lucky coincidence.
Polegającego
The artists themselves had an intrinsic need to tell the story of the uprising in their own way.
mieli naturalną potrzebę opowiedzenia po swojemu o powstaniu. Punktem wyjścia było
The starting point was the personal experience of screenwriter Jerzy Stefan Stawiński, who gave a literal account of his experience as a commander of his army unit in the Warsaw Uprising in August 1944,
w sierpniu na wyjście z kanału z Dworkowej do Śródmieścia.
and his passage in the sewers into downtown Warsaw in September 1944.
1944 roku. A władzy było to na rękę, dlatego
The government found this convenient.
przed zmianą polityczną
Before the change in political leadership, they needed an attempt to get along with society and gain their trust.
kredytu zaufania. To trwało bardzo krótko, ale
This did not last long, but luckily it was precisely in 1956,
przemówieniu
after Khrushchev's speech at the 20th Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, in a wave of freedom, it seemed a likely development.
będzie możliwe. To był właściwie jedyny
This turned out to be the only film that suited the authorities, while also being in line with the true intentions of the filmmakers.
scenarzysty Jerzego Stefana.
Screenwriter Jerzy Stefan Stawiński, director Andrzej Wajda, cinematographer Jerzy Lipman,
Aktorów,
the actors and the whole amazing crew of the film.
wspaniałej ekipy tego filmu. Na fali tego powodzenia zaczynały powstawać
The success of
Canal
Canal paved the way for more films.
pokazał taką drogę.
Its international success proved that it was possible to tell the story of Polish contemporary history in a way as authentic as possible,
Zdając sprawę ze swojego doświadczenia,
relating one's own experience and connect with the audience,
utrzymując w nich taką temperaturę,
generating a feverish expectation of change, of the ability to thrive under this deceitful regime.
możliwość życia w tym skłamanym systemie. Przez kilka lat powstała cała grupa.
The next few years brought the production of a whole range of films that were labelled, somewhat artificially, as the Polish School. This was not an artistic trend with uniform aesthetics as Italian neo-realism had been 10 years earlier.
To była raczej grupa wypowiedzi na temat najnowszych.
This was more a collection of stories about contemporary history, told in a similar artistic tone and finding forms of expression mainly in new aesthetics of image, sound and performances, of which there are several excellent examples among the films that followed Canal.
Filmów po kanale. Przede wszystkim w filmach dwóch mistrzów.
Most notably in the films by the two greatest masters of this trend, Andrzej Wajda and Andrzej Munk.
Bezpośrednio po kanale
Wajda's next film after Canal was arguably the most outstanding film in his oeuvre.
jeszcze może 18 lat później.
Only Człowiek z Marmuru, Man of Marble, 18 years later, possibly had a similar artistic temperature.
Ale efekt popiołu i
But the effect of Popiół i Diament, Ashes and Diamonds, based on a novel by Jerzy Andrzejewski, was in a class of its own.
odpowiedź na
It was a response to the general expectations of the Polish people after the war, especially thanks to the fantastic turn by Zbigniew Cybulski, whose performance as Maciek Helmicki took the literary character to another level,
który był w tej książce,
creating a mythical character who is at once honest, dependable, and somewhat wild.
człowieka,
A Polish patriot on the one hand, ready to make peace with the new system on the other.
a jednocześnie szalony, który jest polskim patriotą, a równocześnie
Because he simply wants to move on. A man who took part in the Warsaw Uprising and yet carries out a sentence on a communist.
w powstaniu warszawskim, ale jednocześnie wykonuje wyrok na komunistycznym działaczu. Ale jednocześnie
Afterwards, the two fall into each other's arms, and he's ready to move on, live under the new political system, which was also the choice made by all the filmmakers involved. After all, they did not emigrate.
z Polski działali
They continued to work in the arts in communist Poland, even though some of them had served time in prison.
w więzieniu. Pewną kontrpropozycją w stosunku do
A certain counterproposal to the romanticized and emotional cinema of Andrzej Wajda
patetycznego kina Wajdy
was the more rational, often snide approach visible in the works of Andrzej Munk.
bardziej racjonalne, często szydercze myślenie filmy Andrzeja Munka. Ale także jak Kanał
Often, like Canal, based on the screenplays or real-life experience, to be more precise, of Jerzy Stefan Stawiński, films that pondered and offered to reflect on the fate of the Polish nation.
zastanawiające się, proponujące wspólną refleksję na temat losu Polaka.
Eroica, the 1957 film, composed of two segments. Although three had been made, Munk felt that these two were so spectacularly good that he decided to cut the third.
z trzeciej. Poza tym jak był krótszy film, to miał wtedy
In addition, a shorter film in those times stood a better chance of being released without waiting to be signed off by the minister.
ministra. Tak dokładnie było w tym sezonie 56.
That's exactly how it was in the 1956-57 season when Eroica, meaning heroic, was finished.
Została ukończona. Dwie nowele tego filmu.
The two segments, one set during the uprising, the other in a Nazi prisoner of war camp,
do którego
where Polish military officers were sent after the uprising, much like Stawiński himself.
oficerowie po powstaniu i muszą dogadywać się z
These army officers then need to get along with the older generation of war prisoners, who represent a school of thought typical of pre-war Poland.
sposób myślenia typowy dla Polski przedwojennej.
Podporucznik Dąbecki. Witam, cześć.
Były właśnie tymi propozycjami. W obu tych nowelach powtarzał...
Both segments had a similar structure. The protagonist was always an outcast, someone who did not fit in with the patriotic Catholic approach, but who was also aware of its value and eventually succumbed to the voice of the majority, finding these values to be legitimate.
Takiemu dyktatowi zbiorowości, uznając go za słuszny. Bohater pierwszej noweli grany
The protagonist of the first segment, played by Edward Dziewoński, goes back to the uprising. Even though he doesn't have to, he returns, most likely to his death.
Dzidziusiu, nie zostawiaj mnie samej! Dzidziusiu!
bohater drugiej noweli postanawia...
The protagonist of the second segment decides to uphold the archetypical view of the escaped officer,
tym, który uciekł z obozu.
the one who fled the camp to defend the honor of the Polish army officer, and in reality, as we see, he dies while in hiding in an attic.
Z Mariankiem dzielimy się z nim jedzeniem. Nikt więcej o tym nie wie. A on jest głodny i chyba chory. Tam siedzi. Gestapo go szukało. Musi się ukrywać.
W tym okresie zadebiutowało bądź...
It was this period that marked the first or second, following a first false socialist realism project,
fałszywym socjalistycznym, czy po dwóch nawet.
sometimes two even, as was the case of Jerzy Kawlerowicz,
Debiutowała, czy wystąpiła z tym drugim swoim, czy trzecim filmem, cała grupa...
first or second film by an entire group of extremely talented and unique authors.
W normalnej sytuacji nie
Under normal circumstances, they would never be presented jointly as a single school or trend.
ale w tym czasie
But at that time, their films had a similar significance,
podobną temperaturę,
a similar temperature, and sparked similar discussions,
dyskusje...
although these were very diverse authors in terms of aesthetics, such as Wojciech Haas, who never made films based on his own screenplays.
który nigdy nie realizował filmy według własnych scenariuszy, ekranizował
Only adaptations of works by authors,
prozę bardzo różną, od Marka Chłaski,
from Marek Chłasko in his feature film Pętla, The Noose, to Kazimierz Brandis in Jak być kochaną, How to be Loved,
na razie o Janie Potockim czy Bruno
not to mention Jan Potocki or Bruno Schulz. I only mention the films made during the Polish school era, but they all had a similar ambiance.
ten sam klimat. Sam Wojciech Haas
Wojciech Haas himself was extremely unhappy whenever anyone pointed out or interpreted the famous scene from Jak być kochaną, How to be Loved, to be a polemical reference to the most famous scene of Popiół i Diament, Ashes and Diamonds. But indeed that was the case. It might be worthwhile to compare these two scenes. The famous scene from Andrzej Wajda's Popiół i Diament, Ashes and Diamonds, when Maciek Helmicki is with his underground commander Andrzej.
zwierzchnikiem z podziemnej organizacji Andrzejem, czyli
Zbigniew Cybulski and Adam Pawlikowski, in the scene where the burning shots symbolize grave lanterns for their fallen brothers whose memory had never been honored properly.
odgrywają rolę zniczy nagrobnych za umarłych braci, których nie uczczono w odpowiedni sposób.
Haneczka, Wilga, Kosobucki, Rudy.
Wywoływali niepowtarzalne...
They evoked a unique set of emotions in the audience.
My żyjemy.
Kiedy do tej samej sceny nawiązał w swoim filmie Jak być
When
kochaną,
Wojciech Haas referenced this scene in his film Jak być kochaną, How to be Loved,
dając tego samego Zbigniewa Cybulskiego w roli
By casting the very same Zbigniew Cybulski to play a poseur who fabricated a wartime legend for himself, he was saying that the true hero worthy of a film is the woman who sacrificed herself and her love remained unrequited. As if he was saying that there are various shades of this contemporary history, and the role of the artist is to take all of them into account, while Barbara Kraftówna's performance authenticated this narrative idea.
Chodź, odwiozę cię do hotelu.
A very different author with a very different temperament was Jerzy Kawalerowicz, who was even further than Hass from a tendency to tell his own story. A master in his craft, his films created a unique atmosphere. This certainly goes for Pociąg, Night Train, an exceptional, almost Hitchcockian film made in 1959. From the concept of limiting the plot to one journey on the night train from Warsaw to the seaside, which took all night in those days.
Proszę, bilety do kontroli.
This marked the beginning of modernity in Polish cinema. A nuanced psychological story. Throughout the first half of the film, it feels like a psychological thriller, with a murderer who we see in the train compartment. It later turns out that this was a decoy, and the film is more of a melodrama. In the end, Pociąg, Night Train, was seen as the portrait of a country where no one is in their rightful place. A nation that has been collectively dislocated. And a change of roles took place, and now everyone searches for authenticity. With help from filmmakers, everyone longs to be in their rightful place.
O, przepraszam pana bardzo.
Przepraszam.
We should also mention Kazimierz Kutz, who began with wartime stories. At first based on books and screenplays by Józef Henn, but who also aimed to create a unique style to set himself apart from his colleagues. He created a very original aesthetic approach in his second film, Nikt nie woła, Nobody's Calling, set in 1945 in Western Poland. This was a common theme in cinema in those days, as it was generally known to be the soft spot for then First Party Secretary Władysław Gomułka, who had served as minister for the newly regained Western lands after the war, and thus was more lenient as far as the subject was concerned. It was generally known that there would be more freedom if the story was set in Western Poland. So the plot was moved from Uzbekistan, which is where Józef Henn's novel, considered to be obscene at the time, was originally set. This film could be seen as a remake of Popiół i Diament, Ashes and Diamonds, because the main protagonist was a young man who refused to shoot a communist.
Nie strzeliłem do czerwonych. Dlatego siedzę tutaj na dachu. Dlaczego niby miałem strzelić? Po co?
But in reality, it was a love story. Ahead of the new wave in terms of creating a certain ambiance. Its use of set design and the new approach to acting, not direct, but focusing on pretending, on silence, like 18-year-olds in love tend to do.
zwykli czynić.
Słuchaj, Lucyna. Tylko nie przerywaj. Dlaczego nie miałabyś ze mną mieszkać? Zarobię na nas oboje. Postaram się o lepsze mieszkanie. Będziesz się mogła uczyć, czemu nie? Alicję też zabezpieczymy.
A jak się czuje pani Stareńska?
Jeśli ci chodzi o to, żebyśmy to przeprowadzili formalnie, to owszem. Pobierzmy się.
To bardzo rozsądne.
Zgadzasz się?
Nie. Ja nie jestem rozsądna.
Będę dla ciebie dobry.
Nie wątpię.
Zdradzałbym cię rzadko.
To znaczy?
Raz na miesiąc.
Można zaraz do tego dodać, jeśli mówimy o...
When discussing pre-New Wave films, we might also mention the first films by Tadeusz Konwicki, director and novelist who made his first feature debut, Ostatni dzień lata, The Last Day of Summer, in 1958.
W roku 58, którego cała akcja toczy się na pustej plaży.
A film set entirely on an empty beach, over a time span of a few hours, between two people with no one else around. In those terms, the film truly was a precursor of the New Wave movement. And this was in line with the atmosphere of the Polish school, because apparently the protagonists of this film, the 30-year-old couple, tried to liberate themselves from the burden they had carried for the past few years.
Wyzwalała się z ciężaru noszonego przez ostatnie lata. On najwyraźniej...
He, apparently having participated in Stalinist rituals, which had been the experience of the author himself,
co było też doświadczeniem autora filmu. Ona...
and she, from the bitterness of a woman who had lost the love of her life in the war and was reluctant to get involved in a new relationship.
Nie mogła się decydować na nowy związek.
Czuję, że tak będzie lepiej. Muszę wracać.
Pojadę z tobą.
Nie, nie można. Ja już nie potrafię. I nie chcę. Nie jestem taka młoda.
Co za głupstwa mówisz? Zrezygnowałaś jak wszyscy ludzie na tej przeklętej ziemi.
Jeżeli ktoś, to na pewno nie ja. A, żebyś ty wiedział.
Jeśli jeszcze dodać do tego...
Then, if we add Stanisław Różewicz, an author who showed everyday life during the war in his films,
o codzienności okupacyjnej, codzienności wojennej w takich filmach jak
such as Świadectwo urodzenia, Birth Certificate, and Wolne Miasto, Free City, we'll have a collection of directors whose work is the canon of the Polish school.
Twórczość składała się na kanon szkoły polskiej. Oczywiście nie wszystkie filmy...
Of course, not all films produced in that period are part of the Polish school.
Szkoły się zaliczają, choć w pakiecie wydanym ostatnio przez
Although a recent DVD collection published by the Polish Film Institute, containing a selection of 20 beautifully restored films, includes even Ewa chce spać, Ewa wants to sleep, a comedy that at first sight had nothing to do with the Polish school. But with its fresh take and new approach to a metaphorical look at the new Polish reality, using a comedic plot, it was received in much the same way.
komediową fabułę o nowej polskiej rzeczywistości była odbierana w podobny sposób.
Panienka kupi tę cegłę? No. 100, no.
Ale mnie pan przestraszył. Myślałam, że to jakiś złodziej. Mam ciasne buciki i w dodatku ta klamerka mnie tak uwiera. Tak późno, a kawaler cegły jeszcze sprzedaje.
Cegła tańsza od kapoty, kup pan. Daj pani 100 i cześć.
Nie mam pieniędzy, wszystko wydałam na podróż. O, to właśnie to mnie tak kłuje.
Nawiasem mówiąc, mówiono, że ten film wszedł na ekran.
When the film was released in the summer of 1957, it was said to be the first released film to portray the feeling of the post-October euphoria, that something had changed, that the yoke on the country was finally loosened.
Październikowej euforii, że zaczyna się coś nowego, że wreszcie poluzowano w tym państwie, że ludzie
and that within certain limits, people could once again live real lives. The joy of comedy in this film did relay some of this post-October joy. These were also the early days for children's films in Poland. This genre was practically non-existent in Polish cinema before the war, and even more so under Stalinism. The period discussed today brought the production of a number of original children's films, starting with Wanda Jakubowska's Król Maciusz I, King Matthew I. One of the critics quipped that in making Żołnierz Zwycięstwa, Soldier of Victory, she had told a story of adults, while treating them like children. Whereas now she was telling a story about children, but in reality appealing to the adult audience. Or Sylwester Hęciński's debut, Historia żółtej ciziemki, The Yellow Slippers. And certainly O dwóch takich, co ukradli księżyc, The Two Who Stole the Moon. If for no other reason than to note its two exceptional child stars, twin actors Jarosław and Lech Kaczynski, who had brilliant turns as leads in this film, which undoubtedly contributed to their courage and later life decisions, though unfortunately they chose not to pursue acting. The entire trend of the Polish school marked a certain path, which was partly the result of a need to circumvent censorship, partly stemmed from the nature of the filmmakers involved. Polish cinema in those days could just as easily have pursued a different path, as was suggested by the poetic nature of early documentaries. The so-called Black Series, made between 1955 and 1957, which were very open in not criticizing the alliance with the Soviet Union per se. That would have been absolutely impossible. No one would even dare. But they were able to criticize the hypocrisy around prostitution, which was completely overlooked or ignored. Hence the title of the film, Paragraph Zero, Clause Zero.
Prostytucji u nas w kraju nie ma. Zlikwidowało ją nasze ustawodawstwo. Jesteśmy nie tylko postępowi, ale i subtelni. Każdej kobiecie wolno oczywiście odbywać samotne nocne spacery. Każda może zawierać przygodne znajomości. Każda może mieć swojego opiekuna.
They were able to criticize the horrific housing situation as shown in Warszawa 1956, Warsaw 1956, a 6-minute short documentary by Bosak and Brzozowski. They were able to criticize the lack of prospects for young people, which also was in line with pretending that everything is all right, that they're living in the best of worlds, like in the documentary Ludzie z pustego obszaru, People of the Vacant Area by Karabasz and Ślęsicki.
Widzieliśmy ich codziennie. Wśród przechodniów bez trudu można odróżnić ich sylwetki. Zawsze ta sama wyczekująca postawa. Te same znudzone, nic nie mówiące twarze. Zachowywali się spokojnie, nie robili wrażenia chuliganów. Kim są? Dlaczego większą część dnia spędzają na ulicy?
Or hooliganism and alcoholism, such as in the first films in the series, Hoffman and Skórzewski's Uwaga, Huligani, Look Out, Hooligans, and Dzieci oskarżają, Children Accuse.
7 lat? To już prawie mężczyzna.
to trwało krótko.
But this did not last long.
Władza nie pozwalała dłużej.
After 1957, the authorities no longer allowed this type of criticism.
Pogłębiać. To też autorzy musieli
When
szukać
open criticism could not be pursued, filmmakers needed to find new methods. Karabash and Ślęszycki would continue to make documentaries for years to come. Karabash forever. In fact, they searched for a new type of poetics, presenting a more poetic and nostalgic approach. Hoffman and Skorzewski moved into narrative films, eventually parting ways when Hoffman began producing his monumental period pieces. Feature films that were the narrative equivalent of the Black series had the most difficulties in getting the green light for exhibition.
Była najtrudniejsza próba uzyskania zgody na rozpowszechnianie. Nawet
Even Alexander Ford had one of his films shelved.
Usunięto na półkę tak zwaną, czyli po prostu zakazano rozpowszechniania, utrzymanego w takiej poetyce filmu Ósmy dzień tygodnia.
Ósmy dzień tygodnia, the eighth day of the week, a film made in this style. Other filmmakers also had their films banned, such as Jerzy Zarzycki, author of Zagubione uczucia, Lost Affections, or Czesław Petelski, who made Baza ludzi umarłych, The Depot of the Dead, based on a script by Marek Chłasko, who had to bypass the much more dramatic theme of the original in a way that resulted in protests by the writer, who ended up pulling his name from the credits, then left the country soon afterwards, from which moment on it was no longer possible to produce any films based on his writing.
Pod sam koniec okresu, już właściwie u schyłku
At the end of this period, once we noted the decline of the Polish school, which incidentally did not die a natural death, but more on that in the next lecture, at the end of this period, filmmakers tried to revive the concept of the direct portrait and to portray contemporary reality, the reality of life of the young generation, resulting in a whole series of first films by a group of filmmakers who were contemporaries to those who represented the Polish school. An example of this is Do widzenia do jutra, Goodbye Till Tomorrow, by Janusz Morgenstern, a film set on the coast in a bohemian artistic crowd, the creators of student theatres and visual artists.
Musi tańczyć, pić, bo ma dziecko, bo ma dziecko małe. Ma dla kogo żyć, ciało ma zwiotczałe. Goni resztą sił, bo ma dziecko małe. Krew próba żyć.
Takim filmem był też
Another example is the debut feature of an extremely talented graduate of the film school in Łódź and a student of the Polish school, Monk's assistant on Zezowate Szczęście, Bad Luck, Roman Polanski. His film Nóż w wodzie, Knife in the Water, a psychological thriller set in the confined space of a boat on a lake, in one day, or 36 hours to be exact, over one weekend, a film that was not well received, falsely read as a snobbish defense of wealth, when in fact it was a morality play. Concealed under the skillfully used form of a psychological thriller. A morality piece warning against this lifestyle, against becoming too attached to material possessions, against showing off, against objectifying one another, and against deceit in relations between people.
Utopiłeś człowieka. Słyszysz?
Jak on miał na imię?
Utopiłeś człowieka.
Przecież musi wypłynąć.
On nie umiał pływać.
Kłamał.
Nawet się nie kąpał.
Nawet topielec wypływa.
Jak tu głęboko?
10 metrów, może 8.
Głębiej.
To co mam robić?
Skacz jeszcze raz. Trzeba krzyczeć. Zawiadomić milicję.
Po co? Nie wiadomo kto to był. Uratują go?
Widzisz, sam mówisz, że utonął. Utopiłeś chłopaka. Już się tego nie da cofnąć. Zabiłeś go!
Przestań krzyczeć!
Zostaw! Jesteś mordercą.
Zamknij się.
Już się boisz, trzęsiesz się ze strachu. Już nawet nie starasz się zachować twarzy. Twardy facet. Pozer jesteś, rozumiesz? Kabotyn. Przed chłopcem się popisywałeś, przed szczeniakiem. Po to go wziąłeś, żeby się móc przed nim popisywać. Ty błaźnie!
Jak ty wyglądasz, histeryczko.
Jak twoja żona.
Gdyby nie ja, byłabyś dziwką.
Jesteś ordynarny. Nienawidzę cię.
O, skacz i płyń.
Nienawidzę cię.
Nie mogę na ciebie patrzeć.
To nie patrz, skacz i płyń do brzegu.
Myślisz, że się boję milicji. Idiotko. Żygać mi się chce.
Kabotyn! Nawet teraz się zgrywasz! I tak zaraz wrócisz!
Film z jednej strony
On the one hand, this film brought a tremendous talent to light and went on to become the first Polish film to ever receive an Academy Award nomination. And on the other hand, it was so badly received that, as a result, Polanski left Poland for good.
na stałe za granicę, a
The next time he made a film in Poland, it was under completely different circumstances. But that will be discussed in one of our later lectures.
z następnych, a nawet na ostatnią opowieść temat.